Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. How is it going? Today, I do this thing over on Instagram, but I wanted to share here as well. It's called Ask Juliana. And essentially, what it is, I get a lot of questions, I get a lot of feedback about just different things: relationship, identity, purpose, success, building a business, launching a brand, coaching, all the things, right? So I figured one of the ways that I could actually share and speak to a lot of the questions that I get, particularly the common ones, are to do an Ask Juliana, where I take a common question and I dive into it and break it down with you here on YouTube and then also on Instagram. So that's what we're going to do today. And then if you are interested in submitting a question, you can email me. I'll put the details below. It's info.julianapage@gmail.com, and we'll get a collection of those and sift through, and you can be featured here, or your question will be featured here. So today is a bit more of a reality check, okay? So when things don't go according to our plan, and if you live through 2020, you know what I'm talking about, right? You can feel, though, so much in your body. That's a really good place to check. Like, you can have headaches, you can have neck pain, you can have tightness in your throat, you could have shoulder pain, because we hold a lot of frustration and anger and disappointment and discouragement, anxiety and stress in our bodies. So a lot of times our bodies will highlight what's going on. But when things don't go according to our plan, often we get disappointed. We have expectation hangovers. We feel frustrated, which can turn into anger. We get moody. We lose our momentum. Our energy gets all funky. We lose focus and become unmotivated. And we just get in a really interesting funk, right? And that's not fun for you or probably anybody around you. So I'm going to dive into a couple of things that you can do and give you a bit of a reality check today, okay? So the first one is to identify whether you are living a congruent identity. So the best way that I can hold this up for you, and that's a fancy way of saying, are you in alignment with God, basically? Okay, but the best way that I can describe that to you, just visually speaking, is when you think of a thermostat, okay? What the thermostat does in your house, right? If it is set on a certain temperature, let's just pull 68. If it is set on 68, if it gets too hot in the house, the AC is going to kick on and bring it back to 68. If it gets too cold in the house, right, the heater is going to kick on and bring it back to 68. So our identity is very much like that. Whatever our belief, whatever we believe about ourselves, that is our set point. That is our set point for our thermostat. Okay. Now, we could get really excited. We could go to a conference. We could learn a new skill. We could do a challenge online. We could get exposed to really good content in a book. We can start a new diet or start a new routine for a few days, right? And if we don't have the congruent beliefs and the right system operating in our operating system, we will go back to our default setting, because that is our home base. That is what we're most familiar with. So we could get hot and the energy could be high, but after that energy stops, if we are set and haven't shifted something literally in our inner man, we're going back to that identity. Same thing, we can get caught up in the past. We can be ruminating on something. We could have unhealed things that we're dealing with. We could have resentments, and we can have trauma and things that we haven't processed that are cooling us down and bringing us down, right? And that can take us out of our identity, sometimes to the point where we literally rewire ourselves to believe less than who we are, okay? So how does this make sense? When things don't go according to our plan, often it is a blessing in disguise, meaning it is holding up that we are operating out of alignment and we are expecting to get the result that we want, okay? So for example, let's say a guy or gal wants to be married. Maybe that guy or gal needs the wedding for their identity. They need to be connected to somebody for the image of what that represents, right? But maybe said guy or gal doesn't know the purpose of covenant, doesn't know what marriage requires, doesn't know the capacity that they've got to be able to carry, doesn't understand the character, right, required, or the ingredients that are going to be needed to invest in a marriage that is long-term and healthy and sustaining, right, and life-giving. So that person is not living an identity that is congruent with that thing that they're after. And that can lead to frustration when they're dating the wrong people, or when breakups are happening and things aren't going to their plan because they thought that was the one. They thought that that was the one that they were going to build with, when really they didn't have chemistry, they weren't compatible, they weren't congruent in their belief systems, so many things, but they were blind to all that because they wanted the image of what it represented. Or maybe somebody lost a job and that was definitely not according to plan, okay? But it could also be a blessing in disguise. Maybe that job was tearing them down. Maybe it was allowing them to get comfortable. Maybe it was diminishing their identity and what they're capable of doing. Maybe it was kind of numbing them out, right? So that they weren't dreaming anymore. They didn't have new, fresh creativity flowing through them every day. They weren't taking new action. They were just not growing anymore. And that would have been incredibly destructive. So rather than let that continue, I'm going to stop that so that you open up to this beautiful blessing that I have for you. Do you get the idea? So when things don't go according to our plan, a lot of times that can be connected to not living an identity congruent with what it is that we prayed for, with the promise of God that we desire, that we're after, with what we are called to, right? So keep that in mind. And then what is really helpful to walk this out, I want to give you the right address for this, but it is, forget the former things. I'm not quite sure where that lives. It is Isaiah. Isaiah 43, 18 to 20. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? So this is super important because I have found that the best way to forget the former things is to put all of your energy on the new thing. So a couple of suggestions if this is where you actually currently find yourself. Habakkuk, write the vision and make it plain. And what I mean by this is don't just make your vision board and your dream board and all that beautiful, but create space to dream with God. God, you have good plans for me. Plans for my welfare, plans to prosper me, to give me a future and a hope, right? What are those plans? Give me some wisdom, give me some revelation, speak to me. You can have worship music on in the background without lyrics and just have a soaking experience with God, just like you're allowing him to give you fresh revelation and give you vision of what those plans are, right? Another thing that you can do is you can have these desires of your heart. So you can make a list of what these desires are and submit your plans to the Lord, and your plans will be established. His plans for you will be established. And so a lot of times what that is God transforming our mind. A lot of times it's God reworking our inner man. A lot of times it's God changing or doing a work in our hearts so that we actually desire what he wants for us, which is what is best for us, which is better, far better than we dare ask, think, or imagine, right? So forgetting the former things is writing that vision, making it plain, but really giving yourself space to be still and know, to dream with God and allowing fresh revelation and ideas and strategies to come to you, because it's God that gives us the power to get wealth and gives us these strategies and these ideas, okay? So that is huge. Now, another thing, when we need a reality check, we need reality checks. When things do not go according to our plan, another reason could be because of perfectionism. I know. So perfectionism, what can happen with this is we get so set on our own plan in our own way in our time, which is often drastically different than God's way, God's plan, and God's time. God's thoughts are not our thoughts, and God's ways are not our ways, right? So that often is a setup for frustration and disappointment and expectation hangovers. We're expecting that just because we make a plan, it's going to unfold according to our plan and it's going to be perfect. Or if that is not going to happen, I'm going to get stuck in analysis paralysis. I'm going to try to learn all the information that I can. I'm going to get myself in the right rooms, exposed to the right people. I'm going to read as many books as possible. I'm just going to try to self-help my way there. We get in a hot mess, okay? But there's some alternatives. So when we are seeing this perfectionism is often rooted in fear. It's rooted in fear of failure. It's rooted in unworthiness. It's rooted in fear of man, right? So people pleasing. It's rooted in comparison and jealousy, because a lot of times with perfectionism, we're looking around at something that's already been done. There's a huge external focus and it's not living securely from within. Okay, so I want to highlight here that it is not bad to have a plan. In fact, having a plan is great because it gives us something to shoot for, particularly if you've written the vision and made it plain. The plan is how you map out when the actions that you're going to take are going to happen. And so you can develop some consistency and you can develop space to live out that congruent identity, right? So the plan is great, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to white knuckle the sucker, right? You don't want to hang on to it. So what I like to do with this is, again, submit that plan to the Lord and your plans will be established. So let it go to God. And I say, God, this or something better. And what that trains my inner man to believe is that I can trust God. God is faithful. God is sovereign, right? Before I was formed in my mother's womb, God knew me. He created me. He ordained me. He created me for good works that he prepared beforehand. So my job is to trust him, right? To have the plans, to take the action. But typically this looks like one day at a time, one moment at a time, one step at a time. All right. So have the plan, but don't grip that sucker. All right. Because another thing that I want to highlight here is 1 Corinthians 1:27, which says this: but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. So whenever we're self-centered, whenever we're leaning on our own understanding, whenever we're caught up in perfectionism, whenever we're caught up in works of the flesh, this is what we're doing. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. So God's power shows up in our weakness, right? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So the key is to really know these principles of God, because we actually cannot walk out a supernatural life or produce the fruit of the Spirit without the Spirit. That's why it's supernatural. That's why you should look different, operate in the world. So for those of you that haven't seen the fruit in a minute or want to just kind of see how you're doing, it's in Galatians 5:22-23. And the fruit are these: love, joy. So are you keeping your joy and your love on? Peace. Are you keeping your peace? Patience. That's a good one. Kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So a lot of times I use the fruit of the Spirit as a self-check. When I am not walking according to the Spirit, I'm usually walking according to the flesh. And what you sow, you reap. So if you're sowing according to the flesh, you're going to reap according to the flesh. Meaning, if you're building it without God, it's all on you. But if you're building with God, God steps in and it's supernatural. Okay? So, and when you're walking according to the Spirit, God's grace is able to flow through you. And in times where you wouldn't be patient, patience shows up. In times where you shouldn't have joy, your energy is off the chain, right? Where it would be so easy to turn off your love and conditionally love somebody, your love is still flowing, okay? And we can't do that in our own strength, okay? And we can't do that when we're trying to be perfect, because perfect is actually something, again, that we're believing. And it's about managing how people perceive us a lot of the time. So it's not living in alignment at all. So what is really important here is to recognize, what is perfectionism? What is being perfect costing me? Maybe I'm not taking action. Maybe I'm not managing my energy well. Maybe I'm so caught up in my head that I'm not progressing because I'm not taking new action and I'm not building momentum, right? I'm just getting more of the same. Maybe I'm not actually moving towards that vision at all, right? So it's really important to recognize that you have the power to reduce your overwhelm. You have the power to recognize that you are not always going to have it all together. We know when we prophesy in part, there's just some mysteries that are far too great for us to know. You're never going to have it all together and you're never going to have it all figured out. But you can build and dream with God, and you can take steps every day towards that, which will bring a certain level of fulfillment, which brings us to the last one, process. A lot of times when things are not going according to our plan, it's because we are not embracing the process. And that usually is tied to the world where we want instant gratification. Well, I invested in this thing. I should have results like a week from now, right? Or I've been doing this program for 21 days and I'm not seeing any changes, right? Well, I've been going to therapy, so this person should love me, right? Like we expect some really bizarre things, and you can start to see it when you actually speak it out loud. But what I want to highlight here is that process is pivotal before promise, okay? And a lot of times the things that are secret petitions in our heart, the things that we prayed for, the promises of God, a lot of them are conditional, meaning our participation is required. So God qualifies the call. So there's a qualification process that's happening, and it's not because of our resume, it's not because of our works, but it's all about going through tests and going through trials and developing our character and building our spiritual muscles and growing and expanding and creating space and evolving for the place that he's prepared for us. Because if we don't do that work, we can't sustain it and it'll crush us. A really good example is somebody that is meant to be a wealth carrier, wealth generator, but that person never did the work. They didn't study the finance industry. They didn't develop their accounting skills, any of it, right? And let's say they win the lottery and they lose all that money because they had no clue how to steward it and how to manage it, right? So that's an example of it was too big and it crushed the person, okay? So qualifying is building, it's expanding, it's growing, it's preparing you. And the process is something for you to enjoy because we live a majority of our life in process. So the question would be, are you really enjoying the process? And can you delay that thing that you know that you're called for, not out of fear, but in a good way, out of wisdom? So for example, some folks are called to write a book, okay? But maybe because of what you're committed to building right now, what needs all of you right now, that's not going to be what you focus on because of the time, the energy, the effort, the focus that would require, right? So maybe it's not your season to give birth to that, right? But will you wait on it? Will you develop? Will you prepare? Will you gain the knowledge and the information to get clear on what it is that you really have to say and the message that you want to put into the world? Just because you want to write a book doesn't mean that that has to be done tomorrow, right? So something to hold up here is with process and with instant gratification, we actually don't get a prize for getting to a milestone the fastest, right? There's really no award for rushing, and it doesn't have to be hard. We believe that we've got to like hustle or got to like front this image or we've got to be perceived in some kind of way to have lives. But if you look deeper, there's actually really loud insecurity screaming there, right? Because that's not somebody that's rooted in their identity. Insecurities are loud and flashy, right? So that's not somebody rooted in their identity. That's somebody not being wise in building long-term and focusing on legacy and impact, right? And developing expertise and skill, right? So think about that. With where God has you right now, maybe something didn't go according to your plan because you're not supposed to get it like that. Or maybe your motives were off. Or maybe you're meant to pivot here so that you can actually build that thing that you're after and go after what you're called to. And sometimes that's a people group. Sometimes that's a business. Sometimes that's a ministry, right? Sometimes that's a small group. It doesn't matter the size, but the key is, are you having and enjoying your life? right? That is one of the most powerful, that's your witness, right? What good is it for you to be in the world and always frustrated, murmuring, complaining, and stressed out to the max and overwhelmed and just not able to even be present? What kind of message is that sending to other people, right? So I want to hold up for you on today is that the reality check is that when things don't go according to your plan, it's often a blessing and it's often highlighting something that you have an opportunity to look at and to change, right? Not by your own power, but by God's power and for his glory. And it's sometimes more simple than we imagine. So sometimes it's a perspective shift. Sometimes it's a action shift. Sometimes we just need to start taking action so we can actually build momentum and get some feedback. Sometimes it's a people group that we're called to, and we need to actually start volunteering or start networking or start connecting with those people. There could be anything, but the wisdom that you can apply here, the reality check is when things aren't going according to your plan, how is that a blessing? How is that a blessing? And will you perceive it? We get the opportunity to perceive these new things by forgetting the former things. So fixing our eyes on the new that's around us every day. There's new mercy every day. There's new popping up all over the place, but we miss it because we're gripping our plan, or we forget who we are and we go back to former things, right? And we bring the past into the present, or we resist the process completely because we had the wrong thought and we cultivated the wrong thought life about the process. And the process is something we lean into and embrace and actually get to enjoy. We get to feel good while we're on the way to something that we're doing. So hopefully this message blessed you. If it did, make sure that you follow a girl here. You can also connect with me at julianapage.com. I'll share some details below, but make sure that you like it and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys soon. Stay blessed.